Spoiler warning, professional wrestling is a work. Now, I'm sure that didn't come as a surprise to many of you, but it was once upon a time. We all had to learn that professional wrestling was predetermined. The question is, when? Well, that's the topic of this episode, because today... Alright, so before we get into the episode, I want to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters like Ephraim Martin, Jess K, and Mr. Woos. And by the way, if you are a Patreon supporter, brand new polls are up right now, so go ahead and vote. And if you want to get in on that action, please go ahead and do so because I really do appreciate the support. Go over to my Patreon page and sign up. Thanks again for all the help. Alright, so this video is all about that special moment in a wrestling fan's life where they find out that pro wrestling is not exactly a legitimate contest. Now, in order to answer that question, I had some friends of mine stop by to talk about that exact moment in their lives. Who are these friends? Well, first up is a man that I'm pretty sure all you guys are quite familiar with, and that is Brian Zane from Wrestling with Wregret, an awesome wrestling YouTube channel, and if you haven't been checking out his stuff, and I can't imagine why you wouldn't, you definitely need to be doing so. Also on deck is Frank Mandolini from the Last Minute Wrestling Podcast, a great show that has featured guests such as Rob Van Dam, Matthew from Botchamania, and myself, of course. Also on the program today is my usual Monday co-host, Albert Albanese from the Slam Sessions Network, as well as someone else you should be checking out too.
Hey there, I'm Vee Infuso. And now you may be asking yourself, Vee, are you really sitting here wearing your own face on your t-shirt? Well, yes. Yes, I am. And mind your own business.
And of course, someone else that you might be familiar with.
Hey, this is Ryan from WrestlingBios, and thank you, Dave, for having me. Dave Knows Wrestling is easily one of my favourite wrestling YouTube channels, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here. I've learned so much watching your stuff, so this is a real honour for me.
Alright, but with all that being said, let's get into the episode.
So when did I find out that wrestling was a work? Well, I don't think it was one specific match or moment that flipped a switch for me as a kid, but I was 13 years old, 1998, watching Scott Steiner and DDP have a feud, and I was watching this going, well, surely they wouldn't be doing some of these things to each other if there wasn't some, agreement beforehand. Like, maybe some of the angles are real, and some are, partly real, partly fake, depending on, what storyline they're doing. I didn't know anything.
When did I realize wrestling was fake? And to that I say, I'm sorry, what? It's what? Oh, 28 years of my life wasted. Man, I am glad I'm at a bar because I am gonna need a drink after this.
I want to say I was like 7 or 8. My dad explained to me that if a 240-pound Macho Man Randy Savage jumps off the top rope 15 feet with a ring bell in his hand, while Ricky the Dragon Steamboat's neck is against a steel barrier, he would have died. And my reaction was, ah.
I found out that wrestling was work, I think, circa 2000. I was 13 years old back then, and it was on a WCW Nitro. I was watching, and there was my dad who told me, oh, that's impossible that they choke people like that. And I was like, what are you talking about? He's clearly choking him. And that was my wake-up call. I was like, oh, wait.
But in all seriousness, the first time I definitely knew it was fake, I think it was X-Pac and Bradshaw. They were in a match, and I think Pac took Bradshaw's head and slammed it into the turnbuckle, and the camera was right on Bradshaw. And then he pushed his head into the turnbuckle about 3 times. And then I noticed Bradshaw hit his head 4 times, which is not the way that should work.
So when did I find out that wrestling was a work? Well, my story of kayfabe getting shattered to pieces will probably differ from others. One of the earliest memories I have of wrestling was watching WCW shows late at night with my dad. We didn't have Sky TV, so we would watch WCW Worldwide when it came on terrestrial TV at around 1 in the morning, or we would record the shows on VHS. Anyway, from day one, I was told that that wrestling wasn't real. My dad was kind of straight shooting with things like this, and he would always point out when things looked phony. And what's odd is that even though he would denounce wrestling as a fake sport, he would still watch it every week. Now, you may be thinking he just watched it because I enjoyed wrestling as a kid and it was something we could both sit and enjoy. But even when I left home later in life, he would still watch wrestling every so often. I'd catch up with him in the pub and he'd talk about how funny The Rock was on Raw, or he would wonder how Ric Flair was still wrestling after all these years, things like that.
A lot of people, including my family and my friends at the time when I was younger, tried conveying that message to me, and I was not receptive to it whatsoever. I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? I just watched a man who was burned alive, okay, just come back and beat his brother for revenge. You mean to tell me that that's fake? I don't know, that's elementary school logic, so...
But I think it was just my natural curiosity at the time, like really getting into wrestling for the first time and wanting to learn everything about it. It led me down a big internet rabbit hole where I would learn more about like real names and past gimmicks. I swear the first time I saw a picture of Kane unmasked as the Unabomb, it changed my worldview completely.
In my like 9 or 10-year-old angst, I was like, that's it, wrestling lied to me, I don't want anything to do with it. And that lasted for about like maybe a week and a half, and then I just started watching again because I still liked wrestling.
As a kid, I hurt. I was like, what do you mean this isn't real? What do you mean it's predetermined? You know, it took me out of it for a little bit because, you know, I wanted to believe so bad, but I guess it was so entertaining I got over it.
Actually, it made me feel better. It made me feel relieved. I always like to go behind the scenes of what I see. I do that with movies, with books, with comic books, music, whatever. And wrestling is the same. So once I discovered that there was a whole world underneath what I was seeing at the moment, that was so cool to me, and I immediately wanted to know more about that.
I've known wrestling was a work since I began watching wrestling thanks to my loudmouth dad. In terms of how it made me feel, it didn't change a thing really, because I still enjoyed watching the characters on screen and I loved the spectacle of professional wrestling.
How did I feel when I came to that realization? You know, I don't know if I felt tricked or betrayed. I mean, God, it was so long ago, it's kind of hard to remember, but I feel like maybe if anything I felt kind of relieved knowing that, okay, like Kane's face wasn't really burned in a fire, or okay, these guys aren't really trying to kill each other.
I never really got the chance to live in a world where wrestling was legitimate. I too developed the same habits as my dad, where I would look out for things that didn't look real. So for example, I can remember wondering why competitors just didn't stop dead in their tracks after getting Irish whipped, or why wrestlers wouldn't try to defend themselves from punches, or why the punches didn't cause any bleeding, things like that. Knowing that wrestling wasn't legit though never stopped me from watching it, and I've probably painted my dad in a real bad light here, but I also think that when you learn wrestling isn't real and still you remain a fan, you get the chance to open up Pandora's box in terms of booking decisions, the creative aspects of wrestling, the sometimes cutthroat nature of the business itself, things that give us a reason to dig a little deeper into this, quote, fake wrestling stuff.
I think my fandom actually changed for the better upon this realization. You know, I don't want to use the term smart mark, but that's kind of what I was becoming at that time, is becoming more knowledgeable about wrestling and how it works. I think that, you know, going into something with, you know, better knowledge and better education of how it works, I think that's essential for any fan of anything to kind of have that working knowledge of like the inner workings of anything, whether wrestling or otherwise. You know, obviously, don't use that as a cudgel on other fans who might not know as much, but I think that was just it was something that helped me process and understand wrestling on a whole other level from when I didn't really realize that.
I got way more into wanting to know what goes on behind the scenes once I realized it was predetermined. I wanted to know why decisions were made, who makes the decisions that make people champions. I wanted to know about everything, and the internet wasn't around then, so I just asked anybody that I possibly could, and then, well, here we are now.
If anything, I think I became a little bit more enthralled with wrestling, knowing that all of this was staged, because it was like, whoa, they must put a lot of work in, like, if this is all just staged.
My fandom changed mainly because I started to get more involved with indie wrestling promotion. I started following them online, and then I attended a couple of shows outside of Italy. Now I can't wait to know more about it. That's why I started the old Last Minute Wrestling podcast. That's it.
Anyway, Dave, thank you for having me on your channel. To everybody watching, guys, keep watching, press that subscribe button, and seriously, just check out all of Dave's content. Honestly, he knows a lot. And I'm not just talking about wrestling. Dave knows a lot.
If learning pro wrestling wasn't legit changed anything about my fandom at all, it made me want to learn more about the behind the scenes aspect of pro wrestling, and it made me curious about how things are all put together, but I wouldn't start digging into this stuff until way later in life. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I hope I can show up again sometime in the future.
Alright, I want to give a big thank you to all my friends for appearing in this episode. Brian Zane, Vee Infuso, Ryan from WrestlingBios, Frank Mandolini, and Albert Albanese. Go ahead and check out all of their stuff, and also I want to give a big thank you to my Patreon supporters out there. Thanks so much for watching this video, and as always, Dave knows.